in the tennis side, we're trying to find the weaknesses.
The Wimbledon final just happened, one of the biggest matches of the entire tennis calendar. And the TV numbers tell a story that nobody in the sport wants to talk about. Viewership for the men's final dropped 16% compared to last year. Meanwhile, the women's final jumped 48%, and insiders are now saying out loud what fans have been whispering for months. Tennis audiences might actually be getting tired of watching Sinner and Alcaraz dominate the sport. Stick around because these numbers are a lot more revealing than they look on the surface. Let's start with the numbers because they're impossible to ignore. The Wimbledon women's final this year averaged 1.9 million viewers, a 48% increase over last year. That's a massive jump driven by a fresh final between two players fans hadn't seen battle for a title before. The men's final told a completely different story. Jannik Sinner defending his title against Alexander Zverev averaged 2.4 million viewers. Still the bigger audience overall, but down 16% from the year before. On paper, that might not sound alarming, but when you dig into why that number dropped, it connects to something much bigger, a conversation that's been quietly building among tennis insiders and die-hard fans for months. A conversation about whether the current era of men's tennis, dominated almost entirely by two players, is starting to cost the sport some of its audience. Here's the theory that's been gaining traction, and it's not coming from random internet accounts. It's coming from actual tennis insiders and longtime fans of the sport. Sinner and Alcaraz have now played each other 17 times across 5 years. They've combined for 9 Grand Slam titles between them, and ever since Rafael Nadal retired and Novak Djokovic moved past his prime years of consistently winning majors, these two have essentially taken over the top of men's tennis completely. For a while that felt exciting, a changing of the guard, fresh rivalries, fresh storylines. But according to this theory, something's shifted. Instead of excitement, some fans are starting to feel a different emotion entirely: predictability. One longtime tennis fan put it in a way that's been circulating widely. He said his fear isn't that Sinner and Alcaraz aren't good enough, it's the opposite. His fear is that the next 10-15 years of tennis will be watching tournament after tournament of beautiful but ultimately irrelevant tennis until the final, where it's always the same two names waiting. Think about how strange that sentence actually is. A lifelong fan, someone who genuinely loves the sport, admitting he sometimes finds himself hoping Sinner or Alcaraz loses early. Not because he dislikes them, but because he wants literally anything unpredictable to happen at the biggest tournaments in the world. That's not hate, that's fatigue, and it's showing up in the ratings. Once this ratings story started spreading, tennis fans didn't hold back. And again, it split into two very loud camps. One side agreed completely. They pointed out that watching the same two names meet in final after final, across hard courts, clay and grass, has started to feel less like appointment viewing and more like a formality. Some fans openly admitted they've started skipping the early rounds entirely, assuming they already know who's going to be playing on the final Sunday. The other side pushed back hard, arguing that this is genuinely one of the greatest rivalries tennis has ever produced. 9 combined majors, 17 meetings, instant classics almost every time. They pointed out that every era of dominance in sports eventually gets criticized for being too predictable, right up until the players retire and everyone suddenly misses them. Tennis journalists and broadcasters jumped on the ratings numbers fast because this isn't just a fan debate anymore. It's a real commercial concern for a sport that depends heavily on TV audiences and sponsorship dollars. Multiple outlets picked up the same underlying question. If the biggest match of the year is losing viewers, even while the two best players in the world are both healthy and both playing, what does that actually say about where men's tennis is headed? And this is where the timing gets even more interesting. Because this Wimbledon final happened without Carlos Alcaraz, even in the tournament. He was out with a wrist injury, which means the numbers we're looking at came from a final that didn't even feature both members of the so-called duopoly. Sinner still drew a bigger audience than the women's final, but even without his biggest rival on the other side of the net, the drop happened anyway, which raises an uncomfortable question about what a truly wide-open men's draw might actually look like in the ratings. Let's take the theory seriously for a second, because the pattern does line up. Sports history backs this up. During the peak of the Big Three era, there were real stretches where ratings dipped whenever Federer, Nadal, or Djokovic weren't in a final together. Fans got used to a certain level of drama, and stop tuning in for anything less. The difference is that era had three legends splitting titles for almost 2 decades, which created constant shifting rivalries within the dominance. Right now, it's essentially 2 names at the very top for what could be another decade. If even hardcore fans are admitting they're starting to check out during the early rounds, that's not a small signal. That's exactly the kind of behavior that shows up in a ratings report before anyone officially calls it a crisis. But here's the counter-argument, and it's a strong one. This final happened without Alcaraz. That's not a small detail. That's the whole ballgame. You can't measure duopoly fatigue using a final that didn't actually feature the duopoly. It's entirely possible the drop has nothing to do with fans getting tired of Sinner and Alcaraz, and everything to do with fans specifically wanting to see the two of them together on the sport's biggest stage and being let down when that didn't happen. Add in the fact that Zverev has now lost this exact final scenario to Sinner in devastating fashion multiple times, and you have a genuinely simpler explanation. Fans weren't bored of the sport's stars. They were disappointed by an opponent they already knew, deep down, probably wasn't going to win. So here's the real question. Is men's tennis actually facing a long-term audience problem because 2 players are simply too dominant? Or did one Grand Slam final, missing one half of the sport's biggest rivalry, get misread as proof of a much bigger crisis? Because the answer to that question determines a lot. If it's genuine fatigue, the sport has a real structural problem heading into the next decade. If it's simply about Alcaraz's absence, then the biggest ratings event of the year might already be locked in, the very next time these two share a Grand Slam final together. So where does this actually leave men's tennis? The numbers are real. A 16% drop in viewership for one of the sport's biggest matches isn't something to brush aside, especially when the women's final jumped 48% in the exact same tournament. Something in that gap deserves attention, but the full picture is more complicated than fans are bored of Sinner and Alcaraz. This particular final happened without one half of that rivalry, even in the draw. So maybe this isn't proof that tennis has a dominance problem. Maybe it's proof of exactly how much fans want to see these two specifically on the biggest stage together, and how flat things feel when that match doesn't happen. Either way, one thing is certain. The next Grand Slam final that actually features both Sinner and Alcaraz healthy at the same time is going to answer this question a lot more clearly than any ratings report from a tournament where one of them wasn't even playing. So here's what we want to know from you. Are you genuinely getting tired of watching Sinner and Alcaraz dominate every tournament? Or do you think this ratings drop is simply about missing their actual head-to-head? Drop your take in the comments, because this debate has real implications for where the sport is headed. If you think men's tennis is more exciting than ever right now, smash that like button. If you think the sport needs some fresh blood at the top soon, let us know why down below. And if you don't want to miss what happens the next time Sinner and Alcaraz actually meet in a final, because you know exactly how big that moment is going to be, make sure you're subscribed with that notification bell turned on. Thanks for watching. This has been Tennis, your channel name, and we'll see you in the next one.